All right, and so again, Lynn, thank you for joining me. And beforehand, you sent me your bio, which I'm going to read. And then after that, I'll ask you to read the poem you have prepared. But anyway, this is the bio. Uh, Lynne Sargent is a queer writer, aerialist. Uh, what's an aerialist, actually?
So like with the ribbons, the circus thing, and you like climb and wrap and drop and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. And holds a Ph.D. in applied philosophy. They are the poetry editor at Utopia Science Fiction magazine. The work has been nominated for Rhysling, Elgin, Best of the Net, and Aurora Awards, and has appeared in venues such as Augur Magazine, Strange Horizons, and Analog. Find their poetry collection, A Refuge of Tales, wherever books are sold, and watch out for their nonfiction book, Not Just Playing, Make Believe, forthcoming from ECW Press. To find out more, visit and I'll put this in the notes once it's done. So first, so again, thank you for joining me. Could you just say your name and then just read the poem you have prepared?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Lynne Sargent, and I'm going to read Cultured Varieties, which was published with Samjoko. Cultured Varieties. They call me sensitive, a princess, but these bruising peas keep so many from sleep. Mr. Big, the mortgage, the precarity not of your labor, but your income, how little your need or those you care for matters. Saber, the small digs, the joke that fell flat, the little insult, the conversation that you are sure you could fix if you went back. You keep going back. Early perfection, the threat that nothing will ever be like that again, that there is no peak ahead, that tomorrow you will forget and fail, and there will be no redemption. Homesteader/Lincoln. The thousand lists, the groceries, the calls that need to be made, the prescription that needs to be refilled, the lesson that needs planning, the deadlines like Ouroboros, always a new one consuming. Green Arrow. The words that come and come, the plots that magically resolve themselves only to slip away into oblivion because right now you need to not be writing. You need to be slipping away into oblivion for just 8 hours, please. Frozen. The ones you place on the aches, the imbalance in your shoulders, the crick in your neck, the twinge in your back, the cat resting on your spleen. Little Marvel. Your hand across my belly, the other in my hair, the nagging fear that I have not told you enough today, how much I love you, how much I love this, us, no matter how many irritants grate at my psyche. I don't even eat peas. Perhaps if I did, they would not be half so bothersome. It would be so much easier to take them from my mattress and swallow them, irrespective of variety, one by one. As easy as counting sheep, as easy as the ending to a fairy tale.
All right, and thank you so much, actually. And so again, I always say the same thing, but I always ask the poets this question. I don't know if it's fair or not, but I still ask it. So, why do you write poetry?
Yeah. I write poetry because it's sort of the way that I make sense of my own emotional universe. I also write poetry because I love playing with language, and I think that poetry is the kind of writing that is the closest to language itself. So whenever I'm like struck by the origin of a word or like the double entendre of it, this is sort of like where I love to go play in poetry. And so yeah, those are the two big draws of poetry for me.
And what is a follow-up question? What is, in general, your process of writing poetry?
Yeah. So I have a couple different processes, sort of depending on the sort of like impulse to write. So obviously, when I'm writing for myself, when I'm writing because I am like struck by divine inspiration or whatever, I have a notebook and I keep notes on my phone, like all these sorts of things, just like little snippets, sort of as inspiration strikes. But of course, I'm also a working poet. So sometimes you can't just, wait for the muse to come down. And so I do also engage in little contests, things like National Poetry Writing Month, where I'm using prompts and trying to sort of grow my craft from there, experimenting with different styles. I write primarily in free verse, but every once in a while, as an education to myself and sort of like a push for myself to grow artistically, I'll experiment with more form styles or other sort of stylistic elements that are not usually part of my practice. And so sort of, I guess, like there's the work poetry and there's sort of like the poetry of my soul. And I think that both have produced really wonderful poems. And obviously there's like bleed across these lines. But yeah, those are sort of the two ways that I approach writing poetry.
And then to jump from there, the poems that you have published in Samjoko, you could choose one of all three. What are these poems about?
Yeah. So the one that I just read for you, Cultured Varieties, I love playing with fairy tale tropes. And so this was one that I literally just wrote in bed. I was like lying in bed. This was while I was doing my PhD. So I had a lot on my mind. I had a lot of things going on at that point in time. I had like 3 or 4 different jobs. And, I was thinking about like the Princess and the Pea. And there are a lot of varietals of peas. So all the varietals that I list in the poem, the Saber, the Mr. Big, the Lincoln Homesteader, those are all actual varieties of peas that I did some like research on to find. And that sort of like prompted sort of like all the things that actually keep us awake at night, and like these things that like live under our mattress are, the size of them, right? The princess is kept up by the tiniest little pea. But these things that like, might seem tiny are not always tiny to us in every moment. And that was sort of what I was playing with there.
Okay, just really quick, what's your cat's name?
Oh, that's Luna that you can see in the background, the gray one.
Yeah.
I have 2 cats. Yeah.
All right, cool. And so I actually taught for a very long time, and actually, actually, poetry doesn't come up very often in the classroom. And so the kids, when they were asked to write, would be quite intimidated by it. So what tip would you give on how to write poetry?
Yeah, I definitely find this myself too when I've taught poetry. Poetry is really intimidating in a way that I think other styles of writing aren't, and I still honestly don't know exactly why. When I'm teaching writing to people, I really encourage people to sort of like slow down and engage in some mindfulness, being aware of how they feel in their own bodies, being aware of the different sensory inputs their bodies are receiving, whether that's touch or taste or sight or sound. Like I feel like poetry is a very sensory medium. And so if you can sort of like pay attention to those little details of what the world is, contributing to your experience, that can be a really fruitful ground to sort of begin writing in.
And though this is a bit subjective, I am just curious, what do you think makes for a stronger poem or a weaker poem?
Yeah, I mean, so as an editor, I am definitely looking for specific things. And I guess like I think that all poetry is good poetry. I think that all poetry sort of like brings us closer to this sort of like human connection. But not all poetry is publishable poetry. So when I'm thinking about poetry that is publishable, in a role as an editor or in sort of like my role as a writer, like when I'm submitting stuff, is I'm really looking for like a certain kind of density in terms of like the ideas or the imagery, something that's going to make the text particularly rich to read, and also something that is innovative, right? So something that is not, we're just doing Robert Frost all over again. We're not just doing Tennyson all over again or whatever, right? I want to be contributing something new to the field. And that also comes from reading a lot and knowing what's out there and, expanding on that oeuvre. Yeah.
And then going back to teaching, I think what's even more intimidating in students than writing poetry is reading poetry, meaning reading to understand it. A lot of times students look at it and after the first few lines, they are just confused and kind of give up. So what tip would you give on how to read? Reading means to understand the poem.
Yeah. So I think that sort of people sort of approach poetry in a little bit too of an academic sense, especially as readers, right? Like when you're reading a book for fun, like you're not, you know, trying to find the truth of what the author sort of meant or intended, right? You're reading to enjoy it, and I think that poetry should often be read in the same way for some kind of enjoyment. Which is not necessarily to say that like reading a poem should always make you feel happy, but I think that like giving yourself permission to enjoy the poem in the way that like you are able to approach it. Like maybe you don't get all the references, maybe you don't like know what enjambment is, and maybe you don't know what illusion is, like you don't know what all these like poetic devices are doing, but you can still allow the poem to emotionally work on you, like if you're just open to it. And so I always encourage readers to sort of be kinder to themselves when they're reading poetry, and you know, just enjoy it for what it is for you. You know, kind of the author is dead and all that sort of thing. And then, you know, if it, you know, prompts you to maybe do some research to be like, oh, what does this word mean? Or this phrase sounds kind of familiar, or this references a character that I'm not familiar with, then you can like go off and do some research later and then come back to the poem and read it again. But that doesn't mean that your first reading was wrong or bad or insufficient. It just means that you read it in different ways at different times, and it meant different things to you in the course of your journey, and that's totally okay.
And then this is probably a very big question, but can you name a poet or poem, either way, that you feel is exemplary, and then why?
Yeah, I mean, I am a fan. There are so many wonderful working poets right now. This was sort of the hardest question that I was grappling with that you sent along in advance. But I think that right now I'd really love to highlight the work of Tiffany Morris. So Tiffany is also a Canadian poet based over on the East Coast. And she does some really wonderful horror poetry. So her poems are really rich in their language and their imagery, and she manages to make the apocalypse feel so cozy and so succulent in all of her works, and I really admire that. She also writes a lot of poetry that involves the use of the Mi'kmaq language, and I think that this sort of like dual languages in poetry, and poets who are competent and willing to experiment in multiple languages in a poem is just so interesting, and is also like really you know, adds depth to the meaning of language in the poem. And I think she does a really wonderful job at incorporating that.
And quickly, can you spell her last name?
Morris, Morris.
All right, cool. And actually, that's it. So before we go, do you want to give a shout out to anything you have that you're working on, or any kind of organization or wherever? Do you want to give a shout out or mention of anything?
So one of the things that I've been working on recently is the Speculative Poetry Initiative. So Marie Brennan recently won the first Hugo Award for poetry, which was super exciting. That was a special award that Seattle put on this year. But we are still working to get our second consecutive year of voting to have a Hugo Poetry Award permanently on the Hugo ballot. So you can Google Hugo Speculative Poetry, find our website, find out the work that we're doing. If you're at Worldcon next year, please go to the business meeting and vote in favor of establishing a poetry award. And yeah, hopefully we'll have more poetry represented in the highest level of, you know, speculative awards, and that'll get more people reading poetry. Thank you.
Cool. All right, cool. And actually, that actually is it. So thank you again for joining me. I'm going to stop recording now.
Okay.
Stop recording.